Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. If you're a yoga practitioner or teacher who knows that there's more to yoga than poses, but you're wondering where to find that, come join our quiet little party. Here you'll find resources to help you deepen your practice, as well as insightful conversations with yoga, movement, and meditation teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. So we talk about all things gentle yoga, meditation, yin, restorative, yoga therapy, mindfulness, and more. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. Happy March. This is episode 25 of the podcast, and we are back with an interview episode, which is really exciting. I think you're going to really dig this conversation with Jessica Patching-Bunch on stress and resiliency and science and practical tools. There's a lot in here in this particular episode. I think you're going to love it. And today's episode is coming out on March 2nd of 2022, which means that we've just started our new deeper dive theme in Moved to Meditate world. So this month we're focusing on metta, which is the quality of loving kindness or goodwill. Metta is a type of meditation practice, but it's also a way of being in the world. It trains us to meet the world with as much friendliness and care and goodwill as possible, rather than moving from our habitual reactive patterns of fear and bias and aversion and wanting and all of that stuff. It is a wise and positive frame of mind that we can actually cultivate. So if you want to hear more about metta, the new theme, you can go back and listen to last week's episode, which introduces the deeper dive theme for March. And if you're on my email list, you will be getting the deeper dive worksheet on metta this week. So you can explore metta in some different ways on your own. And the worksheets are meant to get you thinking really creatively and in your own experience about these meaningful themes each month. So you'll find journal prompts and suggestions for incorporating into your yoga practice, and in this case, some stealthy ways to practice metta out in the world. And if you're not on the email list already, you can go to my website, movedtomeditate.yoga, and sign up in any of the little boxes that say something about an email newsletter. They're everywhere. You should be able to find it. And if you are listening to this later and you're like, oh no, I missed the worksheet and it's not the beginning of March 2022 anymore, you can still get it. You just need to email me at mail@movedtomeditate.com and let me know what you're looking for, and I will send you the worksheet and put you on the list for future ones too. Okay, so about today's conversation, let me tell you a little bit about our awesome guest. Jessica Patching-Bunch, or JPB as she's also known, is a stress resilience coach on a mission to provide practical approaches to understanding and managing stress. After working in neurodevelopment research, she realized she wanted to let her knowledge serve a larger community outside of academia. How cool is that? Struggling with stress-related illness most of her life, she set out to address a real gap in accessible alternative mind care and wellness education. Translation: she teaches practical ways to manage stress so you can get out of your own way, stress less, and live more. This is a great conversation. JPB is really smart and down to earth, so I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from her. So let's go. Hi, everybody. So we are back, and I am really excited today to have a special guest on the podcast, Jessica Patching-Bunch. Jessica, do you want us to call you Jessica, or do you want us to call you JPB? I've noticed you go by JPB a lot. What do you prefer?
I like JPB. It's not very many people call me Jessica, and I know I always feel like it's very formal when they do. And yeah, so I like JPB.
I like JPB. I think it's really cute. Not everybody has initials that sound like succinct and good like that, you know.
Thank you. It was a weird thing growing up, but
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I'm going to be talking to JPB today about stress and unpacking kind of the concept of stress and resilience around stress and how it is as an experience that we can actually influence. And also, JPB is probably the most geographically close person that I have interviewed so far. Since she's in Portland, Oregon, and I'm in Vancouver, Washington. We're just across the Columbia River from each other. And we're both freezing this morning. So if you hear us cough and clear our throats, we're just kind of like, dang, it's 20 degrees outside.
It took a turn quickly.
It did. I thought we were sort of getting spring, but it doesn't. I think that was a tease.
It does that about this time of year, yeah.
So JPB, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do? And I know you have some history in neurodevelopment research, and kind of like tell us what that is, and yeah, anything you want to share to start us out.
Yeah, so I like to say, I'm a stress resilience coach, just trying to provide practical tools and approaches to understanding and managing stress because there's so much stress, especially if we're thinking about the last few years. But even without all of the, you know, wildness of a pandemic and all of the uncertainty and all of the things that have come along with all of that, just living our lives is stressful. We can't avoid it. Um, and what led me to this work, trying to choose my words wisely, but I struggled with a lot of stress related illnesses from the time I was a child. And there was never
Hmm.
any consideration until I was in my mid 20s that it was stress related. And at that point, I would go to the doctor and they would acknowledge that it was stress related and just say, okay, well, just, reduce your stress, have less stress, and kind of left it there. And it was infuriating because it sounded so simple as they told me to just have less stress and this will be fine. There was
Hmm.
no suggestion of like, okay, how do I do that? What does that even mean? How do I, like, is that even possible? And at that point, I didn't have any idea. I just thought, I'm working two jobs and going to school. Like, my life is stressful. That's just kind of what it is.
Like, of course, it's stressful when you're
Yeah.
doing that.
Like, you telling me to have less stress is just, it's stressing me
It's
out even
another
more.
stressor.
um, and so, and then later I went on to get my degree in neuropsychology, and I worked in neurodevelopmental research up at Oregon Health and Science University. I was on a project called the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, and it
Hmm.
is a national consortium study looking at brain development and just a multitude of factors and what affects that. Everything from alcohol use and screen time to nutrition and early home environment. It's really incredible. It's still going on. And I am so grateful for my time in that lab, learning from my boss and learning from the environment there in research, and learning that after I thought I had found my thing that I really wanted to do, I was so interested in research and realizing that research was not where I needed to be.
Hmm.
Um, as I kind of watched how academia works and a lot of the gatekeeping of knowledge that goes on, and how this
Mm.
information is just kind of passed back and forth between academics who already have access to this information, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I wanted what I know to be able to benefit people outside of academia, people outside of this small circle that was just kind of, sharing what they knew to be true, because knowing how we work allows us to navigate ourselves better. Um, so I left research and I thought, how can I share this? And then I started a business. At that point, I had no idea what that meant. And I just knew I wanted to share these things. And so I have ever since.
I think that's so cool because like there is this great research going on and there are these amazing discoveries being made, but like the general public, we get this information often filtered through like sound bites in the media that take things out of context, or goop, or
Yes.
like really unreliable mixes of information and misinformation. And so we need translators like you who have a deep grounding in actual science but can speak normal person language and like relate this to us.
Yeah, and I mean, thank you. That's a huge compliment because that is my goal is just to, sound human. Um, and it is you exactly what you said there. The information that we get about how to take care of ourselves and how to navigate the human experience and what that even means is filtered through the lens of our society, which
Hmm.
is not necessarily human centered. And that can create a lot
Yeah.
of problems. Or just, taking exactly the sound bites or the headlines of an article and cherry picking what information is going to be distributed widely. And we have to
Hmm.
think about why, who is benefiting from, this idea. And is that me? Am I benefiting from navigating in this way? Um, yeah, and it's really hard. And now there's I was gonna say now with the internet, that says a lot about about my
Yeah, I grew up before the internet too. I had to go look stuff up in the encyclopedia.
I know it was the worst.
And
But
if it
now
didn't say anything about what you were looking for, oh well.
that was it. It didn't exist. Um, but now that we have access to so much information, it can just be so overwhelming and confusing of like, okay, which of these pieces of conflicting information are right, and
Hmm.
how do I navigate it? So,
Who do you trust, and like
yeah,
what applies to me? Even like
yes,
this might be true for someone else, but like, do I need to take this info in, and like, what do I do
exactly.
with it?
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot, and it's confusing, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, it's totally frustrating. I think, like you were mentioning about the medical community too needs education on stress and stress management tools too. Like having the experience of going to the doctor and having them just say you're stressed, reduce your stress is super unhelpful. And like physicians don't always know how to direct people to the right interventions for themselves either. So there's like a huge gap.
There is, yes, and that thank you for what a that segue. That is, my that was a huge goal of mine, was to address this very real gap in accessible alternative mind care, self-care, wellness education, because it doesn't, and it does more so now, but it generally hasn't existed to the point where it was accessible for people outside of therapy, which I
Hmm.
think is fantastic. I think that everyone should visit therapy at different points in their life. We still have just a really strange and kind of unhealthy view and stigma on mental health. And I think this is where the separation comes in. Um, I apologize. I don't know if you can hear that. My neighbor's fire alarm is going off, so that might come through. Um,
If you start smelling smoke, though, we'll
I'll let
definitely
you.
pause.
We'll have to postpone this.
Yeah.
Um, but for so long, in Western cultures, since the 17th century, when Rene Descartes was like, "Hey, mind and body,
Hmm.
they don't have anything to do with each other." Um, one operates, independent of the other, which is not true. And for thousands of years before that, indigenous cultures, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, the people who had been practicing all of these things forever were like, well, no, that's not that's not how it is, and they just went about their business. And Western cultures adopted this idea, and you saw medicine and science follow.
Hmm.
And so we still have this very separate way of thinking about our physical health or our mental health. and they're
Mhm.
inextricably combined. Like, your physiology doesn't change above the neck, So it's not there's no separation.
We tend to deal with these things as if they were like separate segments. And one of the frameworks I really like that I've um, run across is the
Mm.
biopsychosocial model of well-being,
Yes.
right? And it's like this is what movement practices and mindfulness practices do so well, is that it looks at us as a whole human, where there is the biological component of like what's happening in our brain, and there's the psychological component, and then there's the like social component of being in a culture, or even just being in like a group of people breathing together in a class, and like this wholeness of the model is really helpful, and is something I think that is often so missing from just the way we treat things with separate specialized professionals, which you know has its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The biopsychosocial model is, as far as I'm as far as I'm concerned, the gold standard. It is just, if we're not taking all of those pieces of our our lives and our experience into account, then we're just leaving so much on the table and just kind of ignoring it, because all of those things inform our nervous system function, how safe we feel, and then how our body responds to that, how our body and brain communicate about what's going on around us. And we've chosen to ignore those things, and kind of this idea, I know in the generation, kind of, I would assume our parents' generation, I'm going to lump us in there together, but that you just kind of ignored your feelings and you toughed it out, and that stuff really didn't matter. And on a
Hmm.
physiological level, it matters so much. And I think that we're kind of, the pendulum is swinging a little bit to recognize those things again.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm really grateful to see that.
Thank goodness. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about stress specifically, because all of the practices that I do and that I've dedicated myself to, I really started them because of stress. And I know some people like start yoga for fitness reasons or whatever, but I really started yoga and meditation both because of like trying to deal with stress. And um, so I'm really curious about how you define stress, and if you think it's always a bad thing, or if it's also something that we need, and what is your take on stress? What is it?
Yes. Um, this is my favorite subject. um, which is great at dinner parties, which we don't have anymore, but
Everyone wants to talk about
no, they
stress,
don't. They
right?
don't at all. Hey, do you want to talk about stress and anxiety? No, absolutely not.
How about pain?
um, Stress is just any change that throws us out of homeostasis. So, like, throws us out of balance in our body. That's what stress is, like, from a biological perspective.
Hmm.
It's not good or bad. It just is. It exists. And we are meant to adapt with it and grow and learn. Our stress response is a biologically evolutionary, adaptation tool for us to learn from, and in order to survive. Because if we're not learning from the things, that the perceived threats, then, you know, evolutionarily speaking, if we didn't learn from that tiger chase, we were probably
It
going
had no
to die.
value.
The thing is, our stress response has not evolved as much as, um, the rest of our brain, our frontal cortex, and our lifestyle now. And so the
Hmm.
things that are triggering our stress response are not the bear chase, the lion that we need to get away from for physical safety. It's money problems, it's traffic, it's relational problems. It is our internal state, how we talk to ourselves, the dialogue that we have going on in between our ears. And this, I think, is the hardest part for some people to get on board with, because we like to look outside of ourselves for the issues,
Mhm.
the problems, because frankly, it's easier. It's really hard to look and say, like, how am I causing this? And our thoughts have cascading physiological effects that inform the stress response, because our brain
Mm.
doesn't know the difference between an event that's occurring outside in our external environment or inside of us in our internal environment. Either way, it's a
Mm.
threat that triggers that red alarm, and then the systems react as they do. Um,
Wow, so our brain does not, let's just underline that. Our brain does not know the difference between an external threat and a threat we're creating inside of ourselves with our thoughts.
no, it's just a threat that's registered.
Mm.
Our brain's job is to take the programming and the information that it's given and then take action, do something with that. And
Mhm.
it's not asking, like, where is this information from? Is it true? Is it coming from somewhere? Like, what's your source? Cite your source. It's just saying, oh, okay, this is the information. Here we go.
Mhm.
And so that is a huge piece of that. And the stress response is, again, it's supposed to help us overcome those challenges, those physical challenges of safety. And so it's giving us resources, these internal resources of sharper eyesight and adrenaline, and kind of shutting down the systems that we don't need immediately, in order to have the energy and attention and awareness and ability to face whatever threat is currently, that we're facing, and overcome the challenge. And the issue, when it becomes detrimental, is when that kind of emergency system is chronically activated just for long periods
Mhm.
of time. We're literally burning up those resources, um,
All the time.
all the time. And that's when it becomes uh, detrimental to our health. And on the flip side, there's, positive stress. And there's research that has come out in the last 7 or 8 years. Dr. Kelly McGonigal has a book, and I
Mhm.
forget which one it is now because there's so many. Is it?
She's great, and she's a yogi as well.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I love her work. Um,
Yeah.
but she cites these studies talking about how they take blood and other biomarkers to measure the level of stress hormones and different types of stress hormones available in these studies, where they are telling their participants stress is harmful. Your stress is going to kill you. And well, I guess excuse me, they're not telling them that. They're suggesting that, and then the participants are like, "Oh yeah, stress is bad for me." They're, and that's their kind of outlook on it. And then the other subset of participants is told that stress is actually beneficial. It helps you. It helps you rise to the challenge. And there are actually differences in the biofeedback that they get in those two groups. So this just
Wow.
all of that just shows how we think about our stress, how we perceive our stress as detrimental or beneficial, changes the physiological response in our body.
Wow. So you
Isn't
can
that
measure
incredible?
that, like, through blood samples
Yeah,
or a brain scan, or, like, how did they figure that
through
out?
both. But the biomarkers that she was specifically talking about were through blood samples, just different levels of hormones, that levels of cortisol and DHEA, and um, um, brain derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, which is like a protective protein in your brain that kind of helps your little brain cells grow and protects them. Um, and so all of these things that are more beneficial were found in the people who had this idea that, okay, the stress is helping me to, rise to the challenge. And then
Wow.
there were higher levels of cortisol, which on its own is more detrimental in the people that were just like, oh, the stress is going to kill me. It's killing me.
Wow. That's really interesting that just our, like, belief and our perception of stress could have such a profound impact on our physiology. And like that could be so beneficial for us to sometimes recognize how this like intense experience is happening in the body to actually help us do something like public speaking or give a presentation or go on a date with someone or do something exciting for the first time, and that's as much a stressor as what we usually call a negative experience, but we kind of need a reframe on how we think about those things.
Yeah. No, it is, and exactly what you just said. Um, Excitement and nervousness and anxiety, they have the same physiological response in your body. It's just how we perceive it. And
Amazing.
and that depends on, what's a lot of factors, what's going on, our history with it, and all of these things, but it is the kind of sweaty palms and the racing heart and the kind of, some of us get upset stomach, the adrenaline rush. If you think about if you're gonna go on a, ride, if you're if you're into, like, I think carnival rides are like jumping out of a plane or something. Um, but it is the same response as when you were nervous public speaking or at a job interview or something. Um, and so being able to pause and reframe is such a huge tool, but it is more than just saying like, "Oh, well, now I'm excited." Because your body's like, "Are you?"
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not about eliminating all stressors in our life and becoming bland beige oatmeal people or whatever. It's about how we become more resilient and how we can work with these different experiences in the body and in the thoughts and in the mind.
Yeah. It is, we literally couldn't survive, we wouldn't be here without our stress. It is what helps us to navigate, helps us to grow and adapt to our environment and all of the things we have to learn through life, and it's not all bad. We don't wanna, the goal is not to eliminate stress totally. We can't, first of all, but
We can't really control that.
no, it's, I mean, as long as we're alive, there are stressors coming at us. It's just building a better relationship with our physiology, a better relationship with how we navigate the tools we have to navigate through it, and knowing that we can. And a huge part of that is trusting ourselves to be able to face the challenges. And
Hmm.
even if, and that doesn't mean trusting that they will always work out how we want them to, but trusting that we can navigate however it does turn out. And
Hmm.
that takes practice of self-regulation and practice of navigating these
Hmm.
situations and practice of withstanding stress, because we can't
Yeah.
build that tolerance to stress and build a higher threshold without managing it, without facing it,
Hmm.
without going through the stress. The repair part doesn't start until the stress is over. And then it repairs, and we learn and become a little bit stronger and a little bit more aware in these areas, but if we're avoiding the stress, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to do that.
We don't build the capacity.
No.
Yeah, wow. I really like this, this way of thinking about it as like can almost even have like a little moment of excitement when you feel stress. This sounds weird, but like, oh, I'm getting stronger.
Yeah.
I'm like next time I'm going to be able to handle this even better because I went through this thing and I made it.
Yes, and that is, aspirational for sure. I
I'm
and
not saying I always have that ability to like see that
no, but
perspective,
that's
but
so amazing to, I mean, at any point, to be able to stop and have that awareness and say, "Okay." And it's kind of the question between like, why is this happening?" And, "Is there something I can learn from this? How can I learn from this? What am
mhm.
I, what am I gaining from this? The ability to face this challenge or to overcome this thing, or I know how to do this next time."
That's like taking our power back instead
Yes.
of looking at it all as the externals of like, well, I have two jobs and I'm in school, so I'm just screwed and it's just going to be stressful. Take our power back of like internally, what could I do? make this better? Like, what could make
Yes.
this more survivable and grow my capacity for next time, for the next challenge?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that so much of our, at least I don't know. I will speak from my own experience, and I know that, we're never alone. So so I'm sure there are others who can identify, but I think, you know, we're taught growing up that in regards to your health, the doctor knows best. In
Mm-hmm.
regards to your education, your teacher knows best. In
Mm-hmm.
regards to, everything else in life, how I grew up was your parents know best because,
There's like this authority figure.
and you don't, it's never you who is that authority figure about
Mm,
yourself. And so I think we are taught to look externally for our power, for our knowledge, for all of these things, for healing,
mm-hmm.
when so much of the time we have so much more agency over ourselves. We have the ability to affect change in ourselves. We have the ability to navigate our health and our well being and live intentionally and choose how we focus, what we focus on, what our energy and attention is going to, which then, creates our environment. And I think we have forgotten that as a collective.
Yeah, I think so. And I want to ask you about what some of those tools might be, but I also want to ask you first about this figure, Hans Selye, that you were
Uh,
talking about on one of your podcast episodes that I was listening to like last fall. And this one kind of got me. It was so interesting because he's like the founder of kind of our modern concept of stress. And like first of all, I was just kind of fascinated because I'd never really thought about stress as being this like modern concept that kind of someone formulated based on some 20th century endocrinology research, and that it was like kind of this new way that we thought about or conceptualize this experience of
yeah.
stress. And then you talked about how some of his research was actually funded by big tobacco. And I was like, what? Because the tobacco companies were interested in promoting cigarettes as like a stress reliever.
Which
And so,
people,
like, all
yeah.
that just like, whoa, blows my mind. Like, what do you think, we should learn from that or know about Hans Selye or other researchers, and just like generally how the research intersects with like commerce and pop culture and filters down to us?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting. I smoked for like 20 years. And that was the biggest, like, "Oh, I'm so stressed out. I need to reach for this," which, if we look at what's in a cigarette, nicotine is a stimulant. So in no way is it calming you down. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Like
Um,
you're taking a break though. You're like, this is how I take a break.
Yes. And, I've worked in the restaurant industry for a really long time, and that was always kind of an issue of, like, smokers just kind of, like, got all these breaks because they would just go outside. And then the people who didn't smoke were like, "Okay, but, like, do I get to just have
Where's
all these
my
breaks? Like, what's happening?" Um, yes. So his research is not unique in the way that it is, um, funded by people with agendas,
hmm,
or that it is skewed accordingly. I think I was very kind of disillusioned by research when I got into research, not because I had experience with anything like that, with anything like unethical. It just was understanding that I kind of thought it's neuroscience. It's this kind of perfect science, and these are the facts about how we work. And then I realized science is just like ideas that we're looking into, and
mm,
um, different people have different ideas. And science used to tell us that uh, all all, kind, all kinds of awful things, racist stereotypes. Um,
hmm,
Women were diagnosed with hysteria if they didn't want to obey their husbands and such. And this was, science. If we look at the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual, the number of things listed in there as psychoses that are just unfavorable to the men who were writing them is astonishing. And so looking at all of
Ugh.
this and understanding that science is not, it's not a perfect kind of carved in stone factual thing. It's an evolving thing. The more that we learn, the more that we understand, the more tools that we have to help us do that, it evolves as well.
Hmm.
And, you know, I think overall, I would just say question everything that you're reading. You know, in school, when you're going to school for science, you're taught to, like, there are whole classes on how to read journal articles, how to
Hmm.
pick apart the articles, the different pieces of them. What do they mean? What information is actually being presented? What are the sources? How do we, how do we navigate it? And if you haven't had that experience, like, you read something and you're like, oh, it says
That
this.
must be true.
Yeah. And so just being really critical with how we are thinking about just what information we're taking in. Does it make sense? Who's benefiting from this information? Like I said at the beginning, like who is it that benefits from this? And um, I think, reading more than one thing. If we find something interesting, look for something else and read more into that. Read further in depth about it.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to say research is like a bad thing. Researchers, I think
Not at
in
all.
general, are trying to, oh my gosh, like I currently again work in research. I work in neuroimaging research now. And some of the projects that I get to take part in are just so amazing. And watching the people that participate and the goals that the principal investigators, the researchers have for answering questions about medicine and making
Hmm.
progress and mostly wanting to help people. um,
Hmm.
but that's not always the case. So
Yeah, it's like for me, it's I really value things that are evidence based and like the clout and that what it gives a tool when we know that this has been researched somewhat, this has been tested. But it's like as a layperson, it's so easy to just like find one article, oh, study says blankety blank, and then that's like end of story. But there might be like 10 other studies that conflict with it that we just didn't have access to. So it's like,
or just shade with
yeah,
perspective and nuance. Yeah.
shade it. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's like that's the challenge for those of us who are not like steeped in research and don't have memberships to all of the like uh, journals that we can even like read the articles if we can even understand the articles.
Yeah.
So
And
it's, yeah.
I think one thing, is we've all become so inundated with so much information. It's
Hmm.
overwhelming. And I think because of that, that lends to a little bit of a lack of attention and focus. And so we
Hmm.
see a headline and we'll read the headline and say, "Oh, that's really interesting," and then move on.
Hmm.
And most of the time the headline is either, sometimes it's contradictory to what the rest of the article will say, or it's just a little, flashbulb. It's an attention getter. That's what headlines
Hmm.
are. And so, like,
Hmm.
what is that article actually saying? What is the rest of it? What is the information that is supporting this claim? Um, so I think just, and I'm not exempt from that. Sometimes I'll be talking to my husband and I'm like, "Oh, I read this thing." He's like, "Yeah, what did it say?" I'm like, "Okay, so I saw a headline about a thing." uh, then I have to admit that I didn't read it. So I think just even that, going just a step further to read the whole, just get that little extra piece of information.
Hmm. Yeah, and then it's like these sound bites become part of our culture, and so we end up with like concepts like stress, and that's just one example. But then they influence how we think about things, and even how we think about things influences our physiology. And so it's like this can matter, and it's just really that's that like kind of point of that inflection point is just really interesting to me how something can be like studied in a lab and then it can kind of filter to us individually in kind of almost random ways.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And, having I think that is such a huge, that in that way a tool to be used is just having more depth of understanding. And that's what I always tell people, like in regards to like your brain and nervous system and how your body work. I don't need you to nerd out about it like I do. Like I think it is the coolest thing ever. And I spend all day, learning about it and loving it. That's not your jam. That's fine. Like that is, it doesn't have to be everybody's like really cool interest. But if you are going to take the time to read something, or if you're interested in learning about something, learn a little bit about it.
Yeah. Totally. And then, I'm glad that we have guides. We have people like you who have studied these kind of academic sides of things, and then you distill it down into tools for people to use. And so I kind of want to ask you about the tools and like what are the different components of your approach to how you manage stress. And I always see you like on your Instagram modeling these things and like doing your workouts and your breathing exercises and things. So can you talk about like what some of those components are that you like to incorporate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you brought up just the fact that we do have guides. I think that so much of, we, a lot of us have had this idea for so long that we have to do everything alone. And that if we can't
Mm-hmm.
figure it out, then there's something wrong with us, or we should be able to, or whatever. Um, Humans are not meant to do things alone. We are meant to do things in community and learn from each other. And we're not all supposed to be experts in everything. We're not supposed to all know everything. That's
What?
why we have different interests. That's why, so I love that we are kind of living in this culture or time now that where people are able to guide and lead with their interest and expertise. And I think that lends to a lot of self-proclaimed experts that maybe can't.
You do have to be careful,
You have
but
to be careful. But then
choose your guides wisely,
yeah.
but there are guides.
Then there's that. I think that goes into gatekeeping of like who says who's an expert and what is it. But that's a whole other rabbit hole. So um,
It's
the
complicated but abundant
Yeah,
times.
yes. And I think that's, for me, learning to integrate and it just allow for the incredible complexity of human life, of human beings, is a tool. And that one's pretty hard to
Hmm.
learn. So we'll back up and go to the basics. My number one go-to tool is breathwork. And that
Mm,
is, I remember the very first workshop that I hosted right before, it was in February of 2020. I
hmm.
left the hospital and had my first workshops, and somebody said, "Wow, I didn't know I was breathing wrong all this time." I still don't know if it was like I didn't know how to read that, if they were kind of appreciative, or I don't know, but
Eye-opening, though.
yes, so many of us have dysfunctional breathing patterns, and that affects both our physiology and our psychology. Your breath
Hmm.
is a direct line of communication to your nervous system, and how you breathe is how you manage stress. It's also a fantastic tool in training your stress response um, to manage and navigate higher levels of stress. And
Hmm.
so breathwork is my number one go-to. It is always available. You don't need any tools outside of yourself. It doesn't take the way that I teach, um, all of my tools are practical and I don't want to say quick, because that's not, but short,
Hmm.
accessible. Because if we're in the middle of a busy day and we're stressed out, an hour long, sound meditation or breathing class or whatever just isn't really accessible. And
Hmm.
so 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, managing your breath and being mindful of it
Hmm.
is absolutely beneficial. And if we're looking at how the brain works, it's not about the length of time that we're doing something, it's about the number of times that these patterns are firing, that these networks are firing.
Oh, the consistency,
Yes.
the
Um,
repetition.
exactly. That's how we learn. So the breath work and movement. And I don't have, it's not a specific type of exercise, even though exercise different types of exercise elicit different levels of stress response and do different things for
Mm.
us. Like if we're doing a bunch of cardio to try and relax, going for a long run or something, that's not going to be the ticket, even though a lot of people think running is. I've heard this idea that running is therapy or running is how you meditate, and those are very different things. Um,
Hmm.
because when you are say if you're going for a long run, you're activating your parasympathetic, or I'm sorry, your sympathetic nervous system. You're elevating
Mm-hmm.
your stress response during that time,
Mm-hmm.
and so
You have to sustain that pace and that like
again,
energetic output,
yes, it's
and
giving you those
yeah,
resources.
which can be a great thing.
That's amazing, but you're not repairing. You're not in a state of rest and repair.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to know how to use which exercise and how our
Mm-hmm.
body functions in order to navigate that. But movement is
That's
essential because with those resources building up in your body, they have to go somewhere.
okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's really interesting to me. The idea that, I mean, I have heard people say that too, that like running is their meditation. And I think that there is like focus, and there is a kind of like your thinking pattern shifts because you're so intensely doing this one thing, and you can't be like having your ordinary ruminating thoughts necessarily.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's like that is something similar to meditation, but it's not the same as the down regulating effects of like being still and letting your breath slow down and be calm, and
yeah.
it's like a different thing that we could benefit from both.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that is the thing. We're not meant to be calm all the time, like you said. We're not meant to be just kind of like a bowl of oatmeal. We're meant to have all of the varying feelings and states of being human. And we're meant to
Hmm.
fluctuate back and forth between all of them and just not get stuck in one spot. And
And
so,
then like you were starting to say that like the cardio or like the running that could help, discharge some of that buildup of stress hormones or energy that's not been used from when we were stimulated and stressed.
yeah, and even just most types of movement, and there are different, your neurochemical balance changes with higher levels of exertion and higher levels of stress on the body. So that's one part of it. But if we're just looking to move the resources and the stress that's building up in our body,
Mhm.
yoga is fantastic. Just
Mhm.
release restorative movements. Um, Weightlifting does a lot of things for, oh my goodness, just like not only the physiological component, but like the self-trust and
Hmm.
building that's a whole I'm not going to go down that tangent, but
It could
all of
be a
these
good
different
tangent.
types of movement are so beneficial because we have to speak our body's language, which is movement. We can't just say
Mhm.
your body doesn't know what money worries are, what traffic is, what um, all of these things that our mind worries about. It knows what movement is, and so we
Mhm.
have to speak the language that our body speaks. I don't know if you've ever tried to tell yourself just like calm down, everything's fine. Like it's not very useful.
That doesn't work great.
No. So breath work and movement are just two of the biggest pieces. And then there's the mindset piece, which mindset is just the word, I think, is just such a popular buzz phrase right now. It's like, what does that even mean?
Right.
It's not about being positive all the time, that toxic positivity where everything's fine and you just
Mhm.
pretend like, no, everyth's not
I
fine
think
all
that's
the
what people
time.
take it to be, is like if I have my head on straight, I'll just be like positive
Yeah,
thinking.
no, that's not
It's
human
not
life.
realistic.
Things suck sometimes. We have to learn how to navigate it. But as we were talking about earlier, being aware of the thoughts that we allow to take up our space or where our attention and energy are, it does have a very, very real physiological impact on how our
Mhm.
nervous system functions, how our body is functioning, and our stress response. And so, being able to navigate those intrusive thoughts or just allow the discomfort of uncertainty and things like that are incredible tools to help navigate those times of high stress, high anxiety, and uncertainty, which we're all living in right now with plenty.
Mhm.
Um, and and kind of those are kind of the three main kind of buckets I pull from, and as an overarching thing, just understanding how we work, understanding how some of the biological processes. And I don't expect people to be as excited about it as I am. But if we have a foundation for understanding, oh, this is how I work, this is
Mhm.
normal
Mhm.
function of the body and brain, it takes away the opportunity that we like to to jump right on to shame ourselves and blame ourselves and guilt about why am I so messed up? What's wrong with me? Why
Mm.
can't I
To make it
handle
like a
this?
personal problem.
Yeah, and it's not. It's just a human thing. It's just how we work.
Yeah.
And so understanding that, having a level of understanding of how we work is also just a foundational tool to use.
This is so interesting, and like in my work I really try to bring together the movement piece and the mindfulness and the meditation piece, and it bugs me, it's always bugged me how compartmentalized those things are in the way that they're taught, at least in
Yeah.
the West. And that you can go to like movement classes, but you don't usually get a lot of coaching about like how to work with your mind and your mindset. You can go to meditation, but you're probably going to be sitting still. And a lot of times people go to try to sit in meditation and they're like jangly, and they need to like move a little bit before they can actually have any luck with the sitting practice. And so it just, to me, they make so much sense together, and like looking at them as a whole piece is really important, I think, and more powerful and more beneficial.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, just I'm so glad that, because I thought about this when I was getting ready to talk to you, just the mindfulness piece is everything that I was just talking about with willingness to sit in your discomfort and being aware of your
Hmm.
thoughts, just being present and being intentional with how we function. And I
Hmm.
think that a lot of people who try meditation or something similar, mindful practices, get frustrated and get kind of thrown off because they think that they're not doing it right. If there are like, oh, then I can't have just this clear, my mind isn't totally clear and zen. It's like, yeah, because we train our brains to think.
Hmm.
And so they're just doing what they're trained to do. And so when you get those thoughts, even acknowledging, oh, okay, I'm thinking, is progress. That's you doing, you are being
Hmm.
mindful.
You're being mindful of thoughts, and that's like literally part of the process and
Yeah.
part of the teaching classically. And like it's even considered an insight actually to sit down and start to meditate and to realize how busy your mind is,
Yes.
because we can go a long time through life without even realizing how much activity there is and what it's like and what's going on inside of our noggin, and so to actually have an experience of that can be a wake up call. And it might not be pleasant, but it's actually useful information. It's a good thing to know.
Yes. Yes.
Then we can work with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that is oh my gosh, awareness is such, and I think a lot of these things are really simple and they are, which does not make them easy. I think that
Not
that
at all. Yeah.
distinction, people think we've kind of been trained to want something more complex and more kind of grandiose, and um,
Hmm.
there's all the, challenges and fixes and all the things that we hear about that are going to fix you. It's like, first, you don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with
Hmm.
you. We're just learning how to navigate this experience in life and how to do that in a way that is not detrimental to ourselves. And
Hmm.
then those around us. You don't know what to do with something if you don't know it exists. You have to be aware of it first
Hmm.
before we can make any kind of changes or notice any, or navigate differently or keep it the same. It doesn't matter if we're not aware of something, there's nothing
Hmm.
we can do with it.
There's no
No,
choice. Yeah.
exactly. And that there's no choice.
Yeah.
And that is the gift we have with our big old brains, is the gift of choice. To choose how we respond, to choose how we navigate our both our internal and external environments.
Absolutely. To even choose what we're putting our attention on.
Yes. Yes.
we have choice with that.
And that is something that a lot of us have to learn.
Oh, I think we all have to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Going back to breathwork for a moment, like from your knowledge of like the research and the science behind of you know all of this physiology, are there things that people are missing in the when they think about breathwork or kind of misunderstanding about how to use it? Do you think?
Yes. I think
Like what?
I think that I think this is a tough one because there are so many different techniques for different. It depends on what response you're trying to elicit. And
Right.
so again, knowing how to use the tool, how it's affecting us. If we don't know, what it is that we're if you get in a car and you don't know what the steering wheel is and you don't know what the gas pedals are, you can push your pedals and do it, but you're not going to be driving. And it's kind of the same thing. I saw there, and there's a lot of poor information out there, and I don't think it's just like intentionally misleading people or malicious or anything like that. I think it's a lack of understanding how the physiology works with it. I was
Hmm.
watching this breathwork channel on Instagram. It's probably maybe a couple years ago. Time is a blur. I don't know. And it was this live that they were doing, and this person was leading this kind of technique that was quick paced and kind of chest focused breathing, which is great if you want to stimulate the sympathetic system and gain some energy and some kind of mental focus and clarity. And then they asked their audience, great, now can you feel your calm? Can you feel your pleasure center? And my thought was, no, they can't, because they have,
Probably
they
not.
have just taken themselves out of that state and done exactly the opposite. And I think that, and this isn't to be like, they're wrong. It's
Yeah.
so heartbreaking because when people are looking for a tool, looking for something to make them feel better, something to just like manage what they've got going on inside them, and they find something and then they're like, well, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's not that it doesn't work, it's that you were given poor information and what you were doing is not the right tool for the outcome that you are looking for.
Hmm.
And so
It's just like you grabbed ibuprofen, but you needed cough syrup.
yeah, yeah, it's not
It's
that
just
it
wrong
doesn't work, it's
medicine.
just that's not the one you needed.
Yeah.
And so I think yes, there is just understanding the fundamentals of when you inhale, you're activating your sympathetic system, that kind of fight or flight, freeze, fawn, the more elevated part of your system, the stress response. And so if we're breathing quickly, which means if we're not taking that breath, like one, if we're breathing through our mouth, which just I want to say never, but never is it's not a good word in any case. But most of the time, unless you are training for something specifically, there are nuances. Day to day, you should never be breathing through your mouth. Your mouth is
Unless
made
you have
for
a cold.
preparing food for your digestive system. Your nose is made for preparing air for your respiratory system.
Hmm.
There are huge benefits to breathing through your nose, like just preparing the air, the moisture, and creating the nitric oxide up in your sinus cavities. And then it slows the process down, gives your physiology time to work. It gives your body the time to actually take the oxygen and deliver it to the places it needs to go. Um, and so slowing down is just such a huge piece of this, which in the way that most of us live, just taking a moment
Hmm.
to slow down is something that we have
Hmm.
to be really mindful of.
Hmm.
Um, so knowing that your inhale is attached to the sympathetic side of your nervous system, and then your exhale is attached to the parasympathetic side, and that's that rest, repair, relaxation, calm, learning part that facilitates all of that. And so, like if we're before bedtime, we don't want to be doing a lot of quick inhales, right? We want to
Hmm.
do more extended long exhales. That's why that, 4 8 I do 4 8, but like the 4 7 breathing is so popular.
Is it like in for 4, out for
Yeah,
7?
breathing in for a count of 4 and out for 7. And I think
Mhm.
that the counting is like it's a good starter tactic. I think it's so much less important than how you're actually breathing. Like, are you counting quickly? Are you, the numbers don't really matter. It's
Mhm.
more of
It's the
the
pacing.
pace and the breath control. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, just knowing those two fundamental pieces, then you can decide, oh, is this breath work session? Is this what I need?
It's interesting, like, people always ask me about the box breathing, which I guess is like in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And I've been told that like Navy SEALs use it or like paramedics use it with people or
Yeah.
whatever. And I'm like, I don't love the idea that there's like one magic breath. And I'm also like, why would you, like, if you're a paramedic or you're trying to calm someone down, why would you have them hold on the in breath? And like, that wouldn't be my go to. So I'm curious what you think about the magic box breath.
I think that we always want a magic pill.
Yeah.
I think that
It's
and
easy to remember.
and yeah, and this, Navy SEALs use it, celebrities use it. It's like, okay, who cares? Like, what does that even mean? And I've seen some of those, like, it's interesting. It's my question on that is like, why do we value the information from these sources above others? Um,
Mhm.
and the box breathing, it is useful. I think that it can actually be more difficult for people who are starting out because those breath holds can induce a little bit
Mhm.
of panic, especially if there is a level of dysfunctional breathing where there is a lot of discomfort in the holds. Because when
Mhm.
you're, if you're the receptors in your brain that measure CO2 are like, hey, red alert, there's too much going on here. That's what makes you actually want to breathe. It's not the need for oxygen, it's the balance of the CO2 levels in your body. And
Hmm.
so if we don't have a certain level of function in our breathing to begin with, those breath holds will be doing the opposite of what we're like. Okay, I want to calm down. I'm going to do this magic box breath to calm down, and it is
Mhm.
not going to accomplish that for us. And so, again,
Yeah.
understanding what is the tool I'm using.
And why?
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I wouldn't teach breath retention to someone who was new to breath work before they had kind of looked at what their basic breathing pattern even looks like and like what they might be so used to holding their breath
Yes.
already
So many of us
that that's
do.
like
Yeah.
not helpful. you know so I think that's a more advanced kind of element of breath work is retention.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, yes, an awareness and willingness to look at where am I right now? Not like, oh, this thing worked for Navy SEALs or whoever else, and so it's
Are
going to
you a
work
Navy
for
SEAL?
me. I just like that reference of like, so what? I don't understand. I'm really confused by it. But
How
um,
is going to the grocery store similar to being a Navy SEAL?
yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, well, they're so stressed out. It'll work for you, but like also, like, what
Yeah.
what other physiological training are they doing? What kind of physical training are they doing?
Hmm.
What kind of the level of psychological training that those people go through is
Intense.
it's very intense, and it has nothing to do with how you live your life. So, like,
It's yeah, because they're being trained to be soldiers,
yeah.
not functional people just living in town and doing a job and having a family.
No, and so, like, what they need in that moment is very different than what you need, and yes, there is a baseline of, like, this is how to navigate your physiology, this is how you can participate in your physiology, but, like, is that technique, is that specific tool what you need right now?
Right.
Is it beneficial for where you are at? Do you even know how you breathe on the regular? Like you said,
Exactly.
are you holding your breath? So many of us do that without an awareness of it because we're holding so much tension and and so before we start trying to do this breath work that Navy SEALs say is perfect for you, what if we just pay attention to how we are breathing? What if we
Hmm.
just build an awareness around what it is that we're feeling, what it is that we're doing right now? what our response in situations currently is.
That's almost too simple.
Yeah, well, it is, and that's why people don't love it because it's not a
It's
magic
like,
pill.
"Is that it?"
Wait, I just have to no,
You want me to pay
it can't be
attention?
that simple.
That's so funny. Well, you have a workshop coming up, right, on movement and the brain and exercise in the brain. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing and what that's called? I think I butchered it probably, but
No, I love it. That yes, it's called Your Brain on Exercise,
I
and
love
I
that.
am really excited about this one. It's one of my favorite topics. It's just a reason to look at exercise a little bit differently because I feel like we have a very skewed perspective on what exercise is good for, why we
Yeah.
should do it, who should be doing it. Um, and
Like we think about how it affects the muscles or our cardiovascular system or how it fits into our aesthetic goals of
yes,
how we want to look or
yes. And and I know so many people, and I know from my own experience, just in life as well, and culturally, this is just how, if you're not, well, I'm not trying to get my bikini body, so what's the point? Like,
I don't have to exercise.
well, the point is, um, have you ever wanted a reason that didn't just like make you feel bad about yourself for moving your body?
Hmm.
Have you heard exercise is good for your mental health, but you don't really know what that means or if it's true or if it's going to work for you? I've had people ask me like, what is it like? So like, it's good for your mental health, but like, what does that mean? And is that going to work for me? Um, how your brain works according to movement. We were created to move. So your brain and body are always changing their communication according to how we're moving, how much we're moving. And you know, like we talked about earlier, moving stress out of your body takes movement. You have to speak the body's language of movement. And so that's what this whole workshop is about, talking about how the brain works and benefits from exercise and how the stress response is directly tied to movement and exercise, and then integrating what we learn with some movement and breath work at the end of it. And I am really excited. I actually just made that registration link live for my newsletter people, and then I'm posting that later, so for the rest of the world.
That's exciting. That sounds really interesting, and I love the idea of just like being motivated by something like that, to do exercise. That it's not about appearance; it's about how we feel and the benefits that we can gain from doing that. And I think it can really change how we approach exercise and coach ourselves through it, really, and
Yeah,
even the kinds of exercises we choose to do.
absolutely. And like we talked about earlier, different exercises have different benefits. It's not just
Hmm.
all one size, one thing applies to every part of your life. We want
Hmm.
different things in different times. We need different outlets in different times. Um, and I don't think there's anything wrong with having aesthetic goals, but just like you said, it's about how we feel. Because if we really look at like why
Hmm.
we want a certain aesthetic goal, it's to feel a certain way.
True.
It's not really about what we look like. It's about what we think will feel like in that space.
Hmm.
And so what if we don't have to drop that goal, but what if we focus more on the feeling part and just cut straight to the chase? How is this going to make me feel?
Hmm.
Um and
That's coming from a more caring place rather than a place of like, I need to fit this like societal standard no matter what, and
yes, I
at the cost of my well-being. And
yeah, no, I
yeah.
don't I participated in that for a really long time in my life, and I have no space for it anymore.
Yeah, totally.
We are all here just to navigate and figure out how to live this life as humans and how to do that in a way that is unique to us because we are all unique. And so there is no like, I should look like this. I should be living like this. We're all here to figure out what feels best for us and how to, create a space that's good for us and the people around us. And if
I
we
love that.
are shaming ourselves and guilting ourselves and just kind of generally feeling like shit all the time, that's not what's happening. And we can see it in the world around us.
Yeah. And any of these tools could be used to make ourselves feel crappy or to make ourselves feel wonderful.
Yeah,
And it's like that goes back to the awareness and the mindset and the intention.
exactly. What is our intention with it? And just stopping to ask that question. What is my intention here? And
Yeah.
then, being able to give ourselves an honest answer, I think.
Keep reflecting on that.
Yeah. And it's a
Yeah,
process.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I am looking at the clock and realizing we've been chatting for quite a while, and I'm sure you've got stuff to do today, but thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your wealth of knowledge. And do you want to tell us where people can find you to connect further, find out about your workshops, your newsletter, your podcast, all your good
Yes,
stuff?
thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was such a fun conversation. Like I said, I don't think we were recording at that point, but I am so happy to talk about this all the time. So I appreciate you inviting me on your show. Um, I spend most of my time on Instagram, and that is jpb.brainbodyresilience. And through there, you can find all of the other things, the podcast, the website. But I know not everybody interacts on Instagram. And so my website is, I rarely use it. It is www.brain-bodyresilience.com. And my podcast is wherever you listen to things, it's available, and it is Brain Body Resilience. So I like to keep it
Perfect.
consistent so it's easy for people to find.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love.
I'll put the links in the show notes for people as
Oh,
well.
great. Okay. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you again. This was so fun and enlightening to hear your sciency perspective and your perspective on science. And it's good stuff. So I really appreciate your time, JPB.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you truly for having me. I hope that it was useful for your people.
So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.